thank you, EY. So just to kind of reiterate, so we're going to have the three presentations, then we'll do Q&A afterwards. Okay, great. So I want to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Stringaris, and he is the chief of the Mood, Brain, and Development Unit, Emotion and Development Branch at the National Institute of Mental Health. He researches and treats depression and related conditions in young people. He trained in child and adolescent psychiatry at the Maudsley Hospital in London and received his PhD from the Institute of Psychiatry, King's College in London. He's interested in how mood is generated and maintained and seeks to use this knowledge in order to improve the treatment of young people with depression and related conditions. He has a special interest in reward processing and how it relates to patients' feelings and decision-making. And a central part of his work is to improve the way we measure mood using multi-method, multi-source approaches. And you can see that the title of his presentation is The Measurement of Irritability, which would actually come in very handy with my 13-year-old daughter. So maybe I'll talk to you afterwards.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the very generous introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very exciting event. So I feel I have to apologize to you for having to talk about measurement. I know that many people find it boring. I have done my best to try to avoid that, but time will show whether I've achieved that. So why does measurement matter? Well, clinically, it matters in the same way that measuring, say, blood pressure, well, metastasized lymph nodes in cancer would matter. It matters to the patient and decisions about their management. So it matters about diagnosis and treatment, decision and monitoring. Scientifically, the value of a scientific construct is also determined by how measurable it is. So do clinically measured constructs relate to brain phenomena, for example, and do neural underpinnings of brain phenomena help us reshape and understand clinical phenomena? I probably don't need to remind you of this, but psychological constructs are typically latent variables derived from multiple sources of information. So you can see, I'll probably do it with a cursor. Okay. Yeah. You can see here, these are kind of the observed indicators, questionnaires, questions, or whatever it might be, and they load on what some people describe as hypothetical, or at least certainly something that isn't measured, such as depression or irritability in this case. So it is important to use a number of different methods to do this. So assume this is the child, and you will ask very simple questions. How do you feel right now? You may do a clinical rating and have a number of clinicians talk to the child. You will use an interview or a clinical questionnaire. You may ask the siblings the same questions. You would very well do functional magnetic resonance imaging, so do some brain scanning, measure heart rate, measure cortisol response to a stressor, for example. I'll be talking more about it later on. You can have other observers who are outside the room. And we now even have little robots, not actual robots that roam around the room, but we do use, and I'll show that, and I'll allude to that later on, we do use machine learning algorithms to deal with measures of affect, of facial affect, for example. So all this is how we get our information, how we derive our information. I'll talk later on about what the challenges are in integrating it. The other thing that one might want to realize is that different measures serve different purposes often. So in epidemiology and public health, people prefer methods that are concise, or at least methods that are scalable, right? So it's very hard to scan 1 million people, but you can give 1 million people a questionnaire or collect routine data on them, right? And breadth is a priority, of course, because finding kind of potent, broad risk factors that one can intervene on is of particular importance, right? Clinical measurement, on the other hand, needs to be diagnostic, or at least aid in diagnosis. This means help in making a decision whether someone requires a treatment or not. You don't have to subscribe to a categorical view of illness for that, but you do have to be able as a clinician to make a decision. And decisions are typically binary, or at least, they may have three categories, but they do come in categories. Clinicians also prefer the fine-grained approach. Sometimes this is justified, sometimes less so. But I'll show you some examples where information about context, about when and how exactly something occurs, may actually be helpful, particularly when you're designing the treatment and you want to individualize this to the patient in front of you. Now, in brain research, you may need different, or in research more generally, different components of all of the above. But one important thing is you want something that is manipulable, that avails itself to experimental manipulation, right? So that's the general stuff about measurement. Let me talk a little bit about irritability and why it is important. So irritability, by one definition at least, refers to inter-individual differences in proneness to anger that may reach a pathological extent. Right? I think it's kind of a very broad and simple definition. It is one of the major modes of stress response. It is kind of, if you think about the fight and flight dichotomy, it is more on the fight side, right? And you can imagine that there are many people in this room. I don't want to cast any aspersions, but many people who may have felt irritable at some point in their lives. It is something that is modified by the environment. So the parental response is something I'm dealing with quite a lot. So child says something to the parent responds, and there may or may not be irritability, right? But it also happens in the workplace and everywhere else, of course. It's a potent modifier of the environment. Just think of a very big man who suddenly becomes very, very irritable and comes kind of charging towards you. You, being the environment, may, change your own tone or your own position in the room as a result. So it is something quite potent, right, compared to other types of emotions and behaviors. It is an important part of the brain environment, what I would call brain environment reinforcement cycles. So in all of the previous things, a learning component is implicit. So people learn, for example, to just run away, or they learn that irritability is actually a great currency, buys them quite a lot, right? And that it makes people go away, and therefore they can just get further in life, right? And other people learn to avoid those people, be scared of them. So it's very, very important from that point of view. And the other good thing is that you can imagine that it can be studied across a number of species. So humans, are higher, mammals, and you can, go down to rodents very easily to study it. So that kind of has a lot of has a big translational potential, if you like. So that's all the kind of great stuff about irritability. Just to give you a bit of a flavor of the phenomenology of it. So this is an example of a 9-year-old boy who has ADHD and some learning difficulties, and you can see what happens. It's kind of probably a familiar situation. It can occur in the absence of ADHD, it can occur in the context of depression or autism spectrum disorders or without any disorder, and it can reach proportions that are really impairing. Just to give you some background in terms of how problematic it can be. So despite being a normal human experience, it can reach pathological extent. So it's a presenting complaint for the majority of referrals to child mental health services, right? So can you please fix the anger? Can you please make sure that the emotion dysregulation goes away? I can't deal with it anymore, right? School says that, the parents say that. Sometimes when the children are older, the child may say that, okay? It's associated with double the risk for suicidality up to 30 years later, okay? It has meta-analytic evidence of a specific longitudinal association with depression and anxiety. It leads to impairment in education and income at 20-year follow-up. It is not bipolar disorder, I hasten to add. It can occur in bipolar disorder, but it's not a diagnostic feature of bipolar disorder, particularly chronic irritability. In its severe form, affecting up to 3% of young people probably, it has recently been designated as disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, DMDD, and been included in the DSM-5 diagnostic manual recently. Now, let me start talking a little bit about measurement, which is, after all, the topic of my talk, and start with very simple questionnaires. So there is a very simple questionnaire to measure irritability. It is here, that's all. It's kind of 7 questions, 6 plus 1, 6 on symptoms and 1 on impairment. It's dead easy to fill in, and it has several kind of good things to recommend it. It's concise, obviously. It's broadish. It is reliable, both kind of internally and in terms of test-retest. It's valid. One of the indications that it picks up this DMDD, this categorical diagnosis, differentially compared to other disorders. Some of the kind of problems with it is that it has a cross-informant correlation coefficient, which is about 0.4. Now, it's not great, but it is about what you would expect, perhaps even a bit better, for parent-child agreement. I should have said that parents can fill this in and with slightly different wording. Children fill it in as well. And obviously, it may be a bit too concise, right? It doesn't capture any of the context. If someone tells you, okay, they're irritable, but, how, when, what exactly is happening during that time? So, as I said, clinicians love the fine-grained and kind of they love kind of the intuitive approach as well. Get this information, get the feeling, get the color. You'll hear clinicians utter those words quite a lot. But what's the feeling you get of it? It's very hard to quantify often what that is. But people feel it is important, and it may be. So people want to know about the intensity of temper outbursts, the frequency of temper outbursts, the duration of the irritable mood, how long was it going on for? Was it a tantrum that lasted 4 or 5 hours? And believe me, that does happen. You see it particularly in the context of developmental disorders. 5 hours, non-stop tantrum over something minor. What's the context and what were the things that went on before it, right? Was it at home? Was it at school? How was it in terms of timing of the medication the child may have been taking at the time? Then what were the consequences, right? What we were saying before, did people start running away? Did the mother just call the police? Did the child smash a window? These are all kind of very important pieces of information that a clinician may want to have. So I'm not going to go through it, but this is just one, just to give you a flavor of it, this is just one question out of a long clinical interview that can be used with irritability. It's called the clinicianary. So it goes into a lot of detail. Now, another approach is the experimental approach, which is kind of the idea of finding out, of collecting parameters of what might be construed as mechanisms of irritability. In this particular instance, the brain and fMRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging data. So to be able to do that, one needs, as I said, something that is experimentally manipulable. So a task that induces frustration. Irritability can be conceptualized as a problem of frustration. And we heard someone talking about their frustration with meta-analytic data before. This is one way of inducing it as well. Frustration is a response to blocked goal attainment. Focus on frustration enables experimental approach and measurement of its neural underpinnings. So we all kind of, as mammals, or as animals more generally, are after some sort of reward, be it monetary or glory or something else more abstract. But we also have this property of becoming quite frustrated when we don't get it. That's nice, isn't it? It took me a while to get this right. And in case you want a kind of an equivalent, a routine, an everyday equivalent of that, child makes a demand to the parent refuses the child, throws a fit, a tantrum, the parent gives in, and the child, has been reinforced by the behavior of the parent, learns that, here you go, I can get my way, right? That's kind of simple reinforcement stuff. So one way to do it is to create a task, or modify an existing task. And this is the postdoc in the branch working under Dr. Liebenluft, who has designed helped design this task. And basically, it's a simple task. Some might say it's a bit kind of repetitive or boring, but that's only the beginning. At some point, you just have to say where the dot is on the picture here. In the middle is on the right or the left side. It's essentially very simple. People get it right all the time, more or less. And then you have kind of non-frustration runs where you're just very jolly and happy. You kind of win all the time. You earn money. And then you start losing here. Basically, the task is rigged, and it induces frustration, right? It says, you're too slow, mate, sorry, you're not getting the money. And this is, of course, very frustrating to people, as you can imagine, and this is reflected in the ratings here. So these are the non-frustrating runs, and these are the frustrating runs, and this is kind of a very simple question, how frustrated are you on a scale from, 1 to whatever, 10. And you can see, being kind of conscientious psychometricians, this was done twice, visit 1, visit 2, and you can see it's a very similar shape, albeit slightly attenuated, and has good ICCs. Now, what about the plausible rise in frustration, good retest reliability, and then significant association with trait irritability ratings? Now, what happens in the brain? This is brain activity during frustration, and I don't want to talk for too long about it because it does require, there's some complications to it. This is the very stringently thresholded version of the picture you saw before. Essentially, we do find an association between trait irritability during the frustration runs, and in a brain area which we would have predicted and which also survives very stringent full brain correction. So this is one way of acquiring brain imaging data through an experimental task, and it is one of the forms of manipulable measurement that I was mentioning before. You can see here the relationship between trait irritability and the brain data that I was talking about before. By the way, I'm very happy to discuss this in more detail for those of you interested in this aspect of measurement. So there are several challenges, obviously, to measurement, not just of irritability, but more generally. I'll mention just a few ones in the last 3 minutes that remain. So probably the biggest challenge in my mind going ahead is aligning timescales. So clinical scales or clinical interviews ask about, say, the last 6 months. fMRI and similar type of experiments average over 6 minutes, right? So if I were to draw these on scale, right, and on the same scale, I just couldn't. I did try that, but you wouldn't be able to see it. So it's completely different time scales, right? And that's a major challenge in my mind. So we try to improve this, to make it better by acquiring different type of data. So by looking more at time course analysis, including parametric modulation in imaging data, but also integrating typically used fMRI signals with magnetoencephalography signals that have a better temporal resolution. This has a number of technical challenges. One of the people who's working on that at the moment is one of our postdocs, Dr. Karen, who, as you can see here, these are responses. These are trials in a reward task, very similar to what I showed you before. And most people would show you the average data over these trials. And what we're after is trying to design the tasks in such a way that will allow us to have enough power to look at the individual curves of people. And you can see here, these are preliminary data. You can see that we get a signal distinguishing depressed and healthy and participants just by the shape of the curve, and we would have probably missed a lot of data if had we looked at the average. So this is one of the pieces of work that we're very keen to develop further at the moment. Clinically, we're very interested in things like automated continuous facial affect recognition that I'll show in a minute, and what most of you will be familiar with, which is ecological momentary assessment, which is, you could use your iPhone or pen and paper to kind of rate your feelings or thoughts or whatever every however many minutes or hours you might want to do this, which gives you a nice dynamic view to it. So let me just try to play this video. This is one way of tracking facial affect, right? So the children move and we record the facial expression. This is in collaboration with Affectiva, a spin-off lab from the spin-off company from a lab at the MIT, and it allows us to. We're using algorithms that allow us to pass out emotions from these. From this facial affect that is displayed here. We do end up with very complex models like the one I'm presenting here when we deal with time data, and kind of making sense of them is one issue. The other one is communicating them to the rest of, of humans who don't happen to sit next to us. Finally, I'd like to say thank you to everyone in my lab, and a special thank you to Dr. Liebenluft, who's the world authority on irritability, and from whom I've learned most of what I know about the condition. Thank you very much to all of you.